Marcus Reed stepped out of his rusted Chevy pickup truck and felt the weight of absolute silence crash down on him like a physical blow. The farm stretched before him in the afternoon heat, a testament to decades of abandonment. Broken fence posts leaned at drunken angles, their barbed wire hanging loose like old scars. The farmhouse, once painted a cheerful yellow, now stood grey and weathered, its front porch sagging under the weight of neglect. Weeds had claimed the fields, growing tall enough to hide a man, and the old red barn listed to one side as if it were tired of standing. This was what he had inherited, this wasteland of memories and decay. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, the familiar tremor starting in his fingers again. The heat reminded him of other places, dusty places where the silence meant danger. He forced himself to breathe slowly, counting to 4 on the inhale, holding for 4, exhaling for 4. The technique his therapist had taught him worked sometimes. Today was not one of those times. At his feet a black Labrador mix named Diesel lifted his graying muzzle and whined softly. The dog's dark eyes held an intelligence that had saved Marcus more times than he could count. Diesel wasn't just a pet, he was a service dog, trained to recognize the signs of Marcus's episodes before they took hold, trained to ground him when the memories threatened to pull him under. The dog's presence was the only thing that had kept Marcus tethered to reality during the worst of it. Marcus had first met Diesel at the Veterans Hospital in Oklahoma City 3 years ago. The dog was young then, barely 2 years old, but already displaying the calm temperament and keen awareness that marked him as special. Marcus had been skeptical at first. He didn't need a babysitter with 4 legs and a tail. But Diesel had proven himself during Marcus's darkest moments, sensing panic attacks before they peaked, providing deep pressure therapy during nightmares, and creating a buffer between Marcus and the crowds that made his skin crawl. Now, standing in the Oklahoma heat staring at his unexpected inheritance, Marcus felt Diesel's warm body press against his leg. The dog's weight was solid, real, cutting through the fog of memory that threatened to overwhelm him. Marcus had driven the 4 hours from his cramped apartment in Tulsa that morning, following directions scrawled on a piece of paper by the lawyer who had called him 2 weeks ago. The call had come as a shock. He barely remembered having a great uncle, let alone one who would leave him property. Uncle Raymond Reed had been a ghost in family conversations, mentioned only in whispers and half-finished sentences that adults would cut short when children entered the room. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the manner of someone who had delivered bad news for a living, had explained it simply. Raymond Reed had died at 91, alone in a nursing home in Shawnee. He had no children, no close relatives except for Marcus. The will was straightforward. Everything went to his great-nephew, the only other Reed male left in the family line. The lawyer had paused then, adjusting his glasses nervously, and mentioned that the property had been abandoned for several years. Raymond had been in declining health and unable to maintain it. Marcus had asked about the value, thinking perhaps he could sell whatever land remained and use the money to get his life back on track. The lawyer's expression had grown uncomfortable. The property was in rough condition, he'd explained. Very rough. The land itself might have some value, but the structures were beyond repair. It would likely cost more to clean up than it would ever be worth. Standing here now, Marcus understood what the man had meant. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a burden, a final reminder that even when life tried to give him something, it came wrapped in thorns. The drive from Tulsa had been difficult. Highway noise still triggered Marcus's hypervigilance, making him constantly check his mirrors and scan for threats that existed only in his memory. Diesel had remained calm in the passenger seat, occasionally placing a paw on Marcus's arm when he gripped the steering wheel too tightly. The dog seemed to know they were heading somewhere important, his usual restlessness replaced by an alert patience. Marcus was 34 years old, though he felt decades older. The lines around his eyes and the premature grey in his dark hair told the story of 2 tours in Afghanistan, of roadside bombs and night raids, of friends who didn't make it home. He had enlisted at 18, full of patriotic fire and small-town dreams of serving his country. The army had given him structure, purpose and brotherhood. It had also given him scars that ran deeper than the shrapnel wounds on his left shoulder. He had returned from his second deployment 3 years ago to a country that seemed alien to him. Crowds made him sweat, sudden noises sent him diving for cover. Sleep became elusive, filled with dreams of sand and gunfire. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. Jobs came and went as employers grew tired of his missed days and sudden absences when the memories became too much. Relationships withered under the weight of his nightmares and emotional numbness. The apartment he'd left that morning was sparse, containing only the essentials. Marcus had learned not to accumulate too many possessions. They only became additional burdens when it was time to move again, and he always ended up moving. Landlords lost patience with tenants who sometimes screamed in their sleep. Neighbors complained about the service dog. Friends drifted away when invitations were consistently declined. Diesel had been his one constant companion through it all. The dog never judged, never asked questions Marcus couldn't answer, never demanded explanations for behavior that didn't make sense to anyone who hadn't been there. When the nightmares came, Diesel would press his solid weight against Marcus's chest, providing the deep pressure that helped slow his racing heart. When panic attacks struck in grocery stores or gas stations, Diesel would guide him to exits and create space between Marcus and the crowds. Now the dog stood beside him in the Oklahoma heat, panting slightly but alert. Diesel's black coat absorbed the sun's rays, making him warm to the touch, but the dog showed no signs of distress. He was scanning the property with the same intensity Marcus felt, cataloging scents and sounds with the thoroughness of a creature trained for detection work. The farmhouse drew Marcus's attention despite his reluctance to approach it. Something about its broken windows and sagging roof reminded him of buildings he'd seen in war zones, structures that had once housed families but now stood empty and haunting. The front porch had partially collapsed, leaving broken boards scattered on the ground like old bones. The front door hung open, revealing only darkness beyond. Marcus forced himself to walk closer, Diesel matching his pace. The dog's ears were forward, alert, but not alarmed. If there had been immediate danger, Diesel would have signaled it. The dog's training included threat assessment, though Marcus hoped those skills would never be needed in civilian life. The porch steps were solid enough to hold their weight, though Marcus tested each one carefully before putting his full trust in them. The front door, when he pushed it wider, revealed an interior that was both better and worse than he'd expected. The structure itself seemed sound. The walls were still standing, the ceiling intact, but decades of neglect had left their mark in peeling wallpaper, water stains, and the musty smell of abandonment. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, creating patterns on the dusty hardwood floors. The living room was empty, except for a single wooden chair and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Marcus could imagine the room as it once was, filled with furniture and family, warm with the glow of the hearth. Now it felt like a mausoleum. Diesel padded beside him as they explored the ground floor. The kitchen was a time capsule from the 1970s, complete with avocado green appliances that had seen better decades. The refrigerator door hung open, empty shelves coated with dust. A small dining area connected to the kitchen, its single window overlooking what had once been a garden, but was now a tangle of weeds and volunteer trees. The stairs to the second floor looked treacherous, several balusters missing from the railing. Marcus decided to save that exploration for later, when he had better light and perhaps some tools to test the structural integrity. Instead, he and Diesel made their way to the back of the house, where a screen door led to what had once been a back porch.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The view from the rear of the house was more promising. The property stretched back toward a line of oak trees that marked what Marcus assumed was the boundary line. The old barn sat about 100 yards away, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. Despite its tilted appearance, it looked more structurally sound than Marcus had initially thought. Farm equipment, rusted and overgrown with vines, sat scattered around the barnyard like ancient monuments to agricultural ambition. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he surveyed the scene. This was supposed to be his inheritance, his chance for a fresh start. Instead, it felt like another dead end, another reminder that nothing in his life ever worked out the way it was supposed to. The property was too far from any city to have commercial value, too run down to be habitable, too large to maintain on his disability payments from the VA. He was considering his options, none of them particularly appealing, when Diesel's behavior changed. The dog had been calmly exploring beside him, occasionally sniffing at interesting scents, but maintaining the composed demeanor that marked him as a working animal. Suddenly, his entire body went rigid. His ears shot forward, and his nose lifted to sample the air. Marcus felt his own alertness spike in response. Diesel's training had included detection work, and this was the same focused intensity the dog displayed when he'd found something significant. Marcus scanned the area, looking for whatever had captured Diesel's attention. He saw nothing obvious, no movement, no visible threats, but the dog was clearly responding to something. Diesel took several steps toward the barn, then stopped and looked back at Marcus, a behavior that meant he wanted his handler to follow. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. In Afghanistan, when military working dogs alerted like this, it usually meant they detected explosives or hidden weapons. The rational part of his mind knew they were in rural Oklahoma, not a war zone, but his body was already responding to the familiar surge of adrenaline. His breathing became shallow, his palms began to sweat, and the edges of his vision started to blur. Diesel immediately shifted modes, abandoning whatever scent had interested him to focus on Marcus. The dog moved to his side, pressing his solid weight against Marcus's legs and looking up with those dark, intelligent eyes. The pressure helped, providing the grounding sensation that Marcus's nervous system craved during moments of overwhelming anxiety. Marcus closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe deeply. He was in Oklahoma, not Afghanistan. He was standing in an abandoned farmyard, not dodging mortars in a forward operating base. Diesel was with him, calm and steady, a reminder that he was safe even when his brain insisted otherwise. After several minutes, the panic began to subside. Marcus opened his eyes to find Diesel watching him patiently, ready to provide whatever support was needed. The dog's unwavering presence was a lifeline, pulling Marcus back from the edge of memories that still had the power to destroy his day. Marcus scratched behind Diesel's ears, a gesture of gratitude that the dog accepted with a slight tail wag. Then he looked toward the barn again, curious about what had initially captured the dog's attention. Whatever it was still there. Diesel's posture remained alert, his gaze fixed on the large structure. Marcus made a decision. They would investigate, but carefully. Diesel's detection training had never failed them before, and Marcus had learned to trust the dog's instincts even when he couldn't understand them. They walked across the barnyard, stepping carefully around rusted farm implements and avoiding the deeper ruts that could turn an ankle. The barn's large sliding doors were partially open, revealing a dark interior filled with shadows and the scent of old hay. Marcus paused at the entrance, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimmer light. Diesel remained at his side, still alert but showing no signs of immediate alarm. Whatever he'd detected didn't represent a direct threat. Inside, the barn was cavernous and surprisingly solid. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated gaps in the roof, and old farm equipment sat covered by tarps that had seen better decades. Hay bales, dark with age, were stacked along one wall. The smell was heavy and sweet, tinged with the metallic scent of old machinery and leather.
Marcus had spent time around barns as a child, visiting relatives who still farmed in the days before his family had moved to town. This one felt familiar in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. It was larger than most he remembered, built during an era when farms were more prosperous and ambitious. The construction was solid, with thick wooden beams and careful joinery that spoke of craftsmen who built things to last. Diesel padded ahead, his nose working the air currents that moved through the structure. Marcus followed, stepping carefully on the uneven floor. Old straw and debris had accumulated over the years, creating an uneven surface that could hide obstacles or weak spots. They were halfway across the barn when Diesel stopped again, his entire body focusing on a specific area near the far wall. This time Marcus could see what had captured the dog's attention. There was something different about the floor in that section, a subtle variation in the wood planking that might not be noticeable to a casual observer, but stood out to someone who had been trained to spot anomalies. Marcus approached the area carefully, kneeling to examine the floorboards more closely. The wood in this section was newer than the rest, or at least differently weathered. The boards were cut to fit precisely, but there were small gaps at the edges that suggested this wasn't original construction. Someone had modified this section of the floor at some point, creating what looked like a carefully disguised access panel. Diesel sat beside him, no longer alert but patient, as if he'd completed his task and was waiting for Marcus to take the next step. The dog's calm suggested that whatever lay beneath the modified flooring wasn't dangerous, at least not in any immediate sense. Marcus ran his hands along the edges of the boards, feeling for any kind of mechanism or handle. His fingers found a small metal loop, almost flush with the wood surface, hidden in a crack between two planks. When he pulled on it, the entire section of flooring lifted like a hatch, revealing a set of wooden steps descending into darkness. The air that rose from the opening was cool and dry, carrying scents that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't the musty smell of a typical cellar or storm shelter. There was something cleaner about it, more organized. Someone had built this hidden space with care and maintained it better than the visible parts of the property. Marcus stood and looked down into the darkness, feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Diesel remained calm, showing no signs of concern about whatever lay below. The dog's assessment gave Marcus confidence, but he wasn't prepared to descend into an unknown space without some kind of light source. He made his way back to his truck, where he kept a heavy-duty flashlight in the glove compartment. The walk gave him time to think about what they'd discovered. A hidden room beneath a barn floor suggested secrets, and Marcus had learned to be wary of other people's secrets. They had a way of becoming complications for anyone who stumbled across them. But this was his property now, he reminded himself. Whatever Uncle Raymond had hidden beneath his barn floor was Marcus's responsibility to deal with. Avoiding it wouldn't make it disappear, and his curiosity was stronger than his caution. Armed with the flashlight, Marcus returned to the barn with Diesel at his side. The dog immediately went to the open hatch, looking down into the darkness with the same patient attention he'd shown throughout their exploration. Marcus clicked on the flashlight and aimed its beam into the opening. The wooden steps were solid and well constructed, descending about 10 feet into what appeared to be a finished room. The flashlight beam revealed stone walls, a concrete floor, and what looked like furniture or equipment covered by canvas tarps. This wasn't a hastily dug hiding place or a simple storm shelter. Someone had invested significant time and money in creating this underground space. Marcus tested the first step with his weight before committing to the descent. The wood was solid, with no creaking or give that might suggest instability. Diesel followed him down, the dog's claws clicking softly on the wooden treads. At the bottom, Marcus swept his flashlight beam around the room, trying to understand what he was seeing. The space was larger than he'd expected, perhaps 20 feet by 30 feet, with a ceiling high enough that he could stand comfortably. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, and several tables occupied the center of the room. What struck Marcus most immediately was the sense of organization and purpose that permeated the space. This wasn't a storage room or a place where unwanted items had been dumped. Everything had a place. Everything was arranged with military precision. It reminded him of command centers he'd seen during his deployments, spaces where important work was conducted away from prying eyes. Marcus approached the nearest table, pulling away a canvas cover to reveal equipment that made him catch his breath in surprise. A radio setup dominated the table surface, not a simple civilian model, but a sophisticated communications array that looked like it belonged in a professional installation. Multiple receivers, a powerful transmitter, and what appeared to be encryption equipment were arranged with careful attention to cable management and accessibility. The radio equipment was old but well maintained, suggesting it had been used regularly until fairly recently. Marcus recognized some of the components from his military training. This was serious hardware, the kind used for long-distance communication and coordination of complex operations. He moved to the next table, finding it covered with maps and documents. The maps were topographical surveys of Oklahoma and surrounding states, marked with symbols and notations in a precise handwriting he didn't recognize. Red pins marked specific locations, connected by lines drawn in different colored ink. Whatever operation this room had supported, it had covered a wide geographical area. The documents were more puzzling. Marcus found folders full of photographs, most showing men in military uniforms from different eras. Some were clearly from World War II, others from Vietnam, still others more recent. Each photograph was paperclipped to typed pages that appeared to be biographical information and service records. Names, ranks, units, dates of service, and other details were meticulously recorded. Diesel had been exploring the room on his own, investigating scents and corners with professional thoroughness. Now he approached Marcus with something in his mouth, dropping it at his feet with the gentle precision of a retrieval specialist. Marcus aimed his flashlight at the object and saw it was a leather-bound journal, old but well preserved. Marcus picked up the journal and opened it to the first page. The same precise handwriting he'd seen on the maps filled the pages, forming entries that were dated and organized like a logbook. The first entry was dated 53 years ago, written in the careful script of someone accustomed to keeping detailed records. The opening paragraph made Marcus's hands tremble as he read it, not from anxiety this time, but from a growing sense of understanding that sent chills down his spine. The war in Vietnam has ended, but for many of us, the battle continues at home. The government that sent us to fight has little interest in the men who returned broken. Today I met another casualty of indifference, a young sergeant who served 3 tours and came back to find his country had moved on without him. He had nowhere to go, no one who understood what he'd seen. I brought him here, to the farm where silence is a friend rather than an enemy. Perhaps we can find a way to help each other heal. Marcus read the entry twice, then flipped through several more pages, finding similar accounts. Uncle Raymond had been documenting something significant, something that had been going on for decades beneath the floorboards of an abandoned Oklahoma farm. The journal described a network of veterans helping other veterans, men who had been forgotten by the system that had trained them to fight. Raymond had apparently been at the center of it all, using his isolated farm as a safe haven for soldiers who had nowhere else to turn. The underground room wasn't just a command center. It was the heart of an operation that had been saving lives for over half a century. Marcus felt Diesel press against his leg, the dog's warm weight grounding him as the implications of his discovery began to sink in. This inheritance wasn't just an abandoned farm with a sagging barn and a broken-down house. It was something far more significant, something that had been trusted to him by a great uncle he'd never really known. He continued reading, learning about men who had arrived at the farm broken and desperate, and who had left with hope and purpose restored. Raymond had created something extraordinary in this hidden room beneath his barn, and Marcus was beginning to understand that he hadn't just inherited property. He'd inherited a responsibility that stretched back 5 decades and might extend far into the future. The weight of that realization settled over him like a heavy blanket as he sat in the underground room, surrounded by the evidence of his great-uncle's secret mission. Diesel remained at his side, patient and steady, as Marcus tried to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd stumbled into and what it might mean for his own future. Marcus spent the entire night in the underground room, reading through journal after journal by the light of his flashlight and several battery-powered lanterns he'd found on one of the shelves. Diesel lay curled at his feet, occasionally lifting his head when Marcus shifted position or turned a page, but otherwise content to rest while his handler absorbed the magnitude of what they'd discovered. The journals painted a picture of a man Marcus had never known existed within his family. Raymond Reed hadn't been the eccentric recluse that family whispers had suggested. He had been a methodical, dedicated operator, running a sophisticated network that had helped hundreds of veterans over 5 decades. The entries detailed everything from financial assistance to job placement, from medical care to psychological support, from legal aid to simple human connection for men who had been forgotten by everyone else. Marcus learned that Raymond had served in Korea in the early 1950s, returning home to an America that was eager to forget that conflict had ever happened. Like so many veterans of that forgotten war, Raymond had struggled to find his place in civilian society. The difference was that Raymond had channeled his frustration into action, creating something that would ensure other veterans wouldn't face the same isolation he had experienced. The network Raymond had built was impressive in its scope and sophistication. The radio equipment Marcus had found was connected to similar stations across the country, each one operated by a veteran who had been helped by the network and had chosen to become part of the solution. They communicated using coded language and encrypted frequencies, sharing information about veterans in need and coordinating resources to help them. The maps on the tables weren't just decorative. They showed safe houses, job opportunities, friendly medical professionals, and legal advocates scattered across multiple states. Red pins marked locations where the network had active operations, while blue pins indicated veterans who had been successfully reintegrated into society and were now living productive lives. The scope was breathtaking, representing thousands of lives that had been touched by Raymond's quiet mission. As dawn broke above ground, Marcus found himself holding the most recent journal, dated just 6 months before Raymond's death. The handwriting was shakier than in earlier volumes, reflecting the old man's declining health, but the entries were still methodical and detailed. Raymond had been working until the very end, helping veterans even as his own body was failing him. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Raymond entered the nursing home, where he would spend his last days. Marcus read it with growing emotion, recognizing in the carefully chosen words a message that had been intended for whoever would eventually discover this hidden legacy. My time is running short, and I find myself thinking about what will happen to the network when I'm gone. I've spent 50 years building something important, something that has saved lives and restored hope to men who had lost everything. But a network is only as strong as its operators, and I won't live forever. I've been thinking about my great-nephew Marcus. I haven't seen him since he was a boy, but I've kept track of his service record through contacts in the military. 2 tours in Afghanistan, decorated for valor, wounded in action. He came home broken, like so many others, and he's been struggling to find his place in a world that doesn't understand what he's been through. Perhaps that's exactly what qualifies him to understand what we do here. Perhaps his own pain will help him recognize the pain in others. I'm leaving him the farm, not because it's all I have to give, but because it's the most important thing I have to give. The network needs someone young enough and strong enough to carry it forward into the next generation. If Marcus is reading this, then he's already taken the first step by discovering what lies beneath the barn floor. The question now is whether he'll choose to take the second step, whether he'll accept the responsibility that comes with this inheritance. I hope he will. The network has helped thousands of veterans over the years, but there are thousands more who still need our help. The files contain everything he'll need to know.
The radio frequencies, the contact codes, the locations of safe houses and friendly resources. More importantly, they contain the names and stories of the people who make this network function, veterans who have dedicated their lives to helping other veterans. They're good people, Marcus. Trust them and let them help you learn what you need to know. The mission continues, with or without any one individual, but it continues better when it's in the hands of someone who understands what it means to serve, what it means to sacrifice, and what it means to come home to a country that has moved on without you. I believe Marcus is that someone. I pray he'll prove me right. Marcus set down the journal with hands that shook slightly, not from anxiety this time, but from the weight of responsibility he felt settling on his shoulders. Raymond had been watching him from a distance, following his struggles, and had concluded that Marcus's pain qualified him to help others in similar circumstances. It was both humbling and terrifying. Diesel stirred at his feet, rising and stretching before padding over to one of the covered tables. The dog sniffed along the edge of the canvas tarp, then looked back at Marcus with the same focused attention he'd shown when first detecting the hidden room. Marcus understood the signal and moved to uncover whatever had captured Diesel's interest. Beneath the tarp was a sophisticated computer setup, far more modern than the rest of the equipment in the room. Multiple monitors were connected to a powerful desktop computer, with backup drives and networking equipment that suggested this system was connected to the outside world, despite being buried beneath a barn floor. Marcus recognized military-grade encryption software running on the screens, designed to protect sensitive communications from interception. A note was taped to one of the monitors, written in Raymond's careful handwriting. Marcus, the password is your service number. The network has been waiting for you to make contact.
They know you're coming. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. Raymond had been so confident that Marcus would discover this room and choose to continue the mission that he'd already informed the network of the transition. Somewhere out there, veterans were waiting to hear from Raymond's successor, waiting to know if the network would continue operating or if decades of careful work would die with the old man. The computer system came to life when Marcus entered his military service number, displaying a desktop that was organized with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized everything else in the room. Folders were clearly labeled with categories like active cases, resources, safe houses, and network personnel. Each folder contained dozens of files representing the infrastructure Raymond had built over 5 decades. Marcus opened the active cases folder first, finding profiles of veterans who were currently receiving help from the network. Each profile contained a photograph, service history, current situation, and detailed notes about what kind of assistance was being provided. The cases ranged from simple financial aid to complex situations involving legal problems, medical issues, or family crises. One profile caught Marcus's attention immediately. A young woman named Sarah Martinez, a Navy veteran who had served 2 tours on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf. She had been medically discharged after a training accident left her with chronic pain and limited mobility. The VA had denied her disability claim, leaving her without income or medical benefits. She was currently living in her car in a Walmart parking lot in Amarillo, Texas, surviving on what little money she could earn from odd jobs. The notes indicated that Raymond had been working on Sarah's case for 3 months, using network contacts to gather evidence for an appeal of her disability claim and coordinating with a safe house operator in Texas to provide her with temporary housing. The most recent entry was dated just a week before Raymond's death, noting that Sarah's situation was becoming critical and required immediate intervention. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he read Sarah's story, recognizing elements of his own struggle in her experience. The bureaucratic indifference, the financial desperation, the isolation of dealing with problems that civilian society couldn't understand or didn't care to address. Sarah could easily have been him if not for the small disability payments and medical benefits that kept him housed and fed. He opened several more case files, finding similar stories of veterans who had been failed by the system they had served.
a former Marine struggling with addiction, unable to get treatment through VA programs that were overloaded and underfunded. An Army veteran facing foreclosure on his home, unable to work due to PTSD symptoms that his doctors didn't take seriously. An Air Force mechanic who had been exposed to toxic chemicals during her service, now battling cancer while the military denied any connection to her illness. Each case represented a human being in crisis, someone who had served their country with honor and was now paying the price for that service. Marcus felt the weight of their collective suffering, and with it a growing sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since leaving the military. Diesel had been exploring the room while Marcus worked at the computer, his nose leading him to corners and crevices that held interesting scents. Now the dog returned to Marcus's side, carrying something in his mouth. It was another journal, this one smaller and more worn than the others. When Marcus opened it, he found that it wasn't filled with operational notes or case files. Instead, it contained personal reflections, thoughts that Raymond had recorded during quiet moments over the years. The entries in this journal revealed the emotional cost of the work Raymond had been doing. Marcus read about sleepless nights when cases went wrong, about veterans who couldn't be saved despite the network's best efforts, about the frustration of fighting a system that seemed designed to fail the people who had served it. But he also read about moments of triumph, about lives that had been rebuilt and families that had been reunited, about veterans who had found hope again after years of despair. One entry, written 15 years earlier, particularly resonated with Marcus. Had a visit today from Tommy Richardson, the young Army sergeant I helped about 5 years ago. He was in bad shape when he first came here, drinking too much, couldn't hold a job, family had given up on him. Today he stopped by to tell me he's been sober for 3 years, just got promoted to supervisor at the plant where he works, and his daughter is getting married next month. He thanked me for saving his life, but he doesn't understand that he saved mine too. Every veteran we help reminds me why this work matters, why it's worth the long hours and the sleepless nights and the constant worry about funding and security. We're not just helping individual people, we're preserving something essential about what it means to serve, what it means to take care of your brothers and sisters in arms. The government may forget about us once we're no longer useful, but we don't forget about each other. That's what this network really is, a way of honoring the bonds that were forged in service and making sure they survive the transition to civilian life. Every veteran we help becomes stronger, and eventually many of them choose to help others in turn. The network grows, the mission continues, and the promise we made to each other in uniform remains unbroken. Marcus closed the journal and sat back in his chair, feeling the full magnitude of what Raymond had entrusted to him. This wasn't just about inheriting property or even continuing a charitable operation. It was about preserving something fundamental to military culture, the principle that no one gets left behind. Raymond had created a way to extend that principle beyond active duty, ensuring that veterans would continue to look out for each other long after they hung up their uniforms. The computer chimed softly, indicating an incoming message through the encrypted communication system. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then clicked on the notification. A message appeared on the screen, addressed to Shepherd Base from someone identified only as Phoenix Station. Shepherd Base, this is Phoenix Station checking in. Haven't heard from you in over a week. Is everything okay? Sarah Martinez's situation in Amarillo is getting worse. She's been in contact with local law enforcement twice this week, and I'm worried she's going to do something desperate if we don't get her help soon. Please advise. Phoenix out. Marcus stared at the message, feeling the immediate weight of responsibility. Someone named Sarah Martinez, the same woman whose case file he'd just read, was in crisis right now. Someone at Phoenix Station was waiting for instructions from Shepherd Base, not knowing that Raymond was dead and that the network was in transition. Marcus looked down at Diesel, who was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. The dog seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, his posture alert but calm. Marcus had a choice to make, and he had to make it quickly. He could shut down the computer, lock up the underground room and walk away from all of this. He could sell the farm, take whatever money he could get for it, and try to build a normal civilian life somewhere else. Or he could accept the responsibility that Raymond had left him, learn how to operate the network, and dedicate his life to helping veterans who had nowhere else to turn. It would mean giving up any hope of a quiet, peaceful existence. It would mean taking on the problems and pain of hundreds of people he'd never met. It would mean risking his own stability to provide stability for others. Marcus thought about his apartment in Tulsa, sparse and temporary, a place to exist rather than live. He thought about the dead-end jobs and the sleepless nights and the constant struggle to find meaning in a civilian world that seemed alien to him. Then he thought about Sarah Martinez, living in her car in a Walmart parking lot, fighting a system that was supposed to take care of her, but had instead abandoned her to bureaucratic indifference. He placed his hands on the keyboard and began to type. Phoenix Station, this is Shepherd Base. Sorry for the communication delay. We've had some operational changes here, but the mission continues. Send me everything you have on the Martinez case. I want to know exactly what resources we need to get her situation stabilized. New Shepherd is taking over operations, but the flock remains our priority. Shepherd Base out. The response came back within minutes, relief evident even through the formal language of the encrypted message. Phoenix Station provided detailed information about Sarah's situation, including contact information for local resources and a plan that had been developed but not yet implemented due to lack of authorization from Shepherd Base. Marcus spent the next several hours learning how to navigate the network's communication protocols and resource database. The system was sophisticated, but user-friendly, designed by people who understood that operators might need to learn quickly in crisis situations. By noon, he had authorized emergency assistance for Sarah Martinez and 2 other veterans whose cases required immediate attention. The work was absorbing in a way that nothing had been for Marcus since leaving the military. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something larger than himself, something that mattered beyond his own survival. The network gave him purpose, structure, and most importantly, a way to transform his own pain into help for others who were experiencing similar struggles. Diesel seemed to sense the change in Marcus's demeanor, the dog's own posture relaxing as his handler found focus and direction. The anxiety and hypervigilance that had characterized Marcus's civilian life began to recede, replaced by the calm intensity he'd felt during military operations when the mission was clear and the objective was worth pursuing. By late afternoon, Marcus had established contact with 12 different network stations across 7 states. Each station was operated by a veteran who had been helped by the network and had chosen to dedicate part of their life to helping others. They were welders and teachers and small business owners, people who had rebuilt their lives and were now sharing their strength with those who hadn't yet found their footing. The conversations were professional but warm, characterized by the easy camaraderie that Marcus remembered from his military service. These were people who understood each other without lengthy explanations, who shared a common language and common values. For the first time since leaving the army, Marcus felt like he was talking to his tribe. One conversation particularly stood out to him.
A woman identifying herself as Mountain Station turned out to be located in Colorado, where she operated a small ranch that served as both a working farm and a temporary refuge for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had found her calling and was comfortable with the responsibilities that came with it. "I was in your position about 10 years ago," she told Marcus during their initial conversation. "Raymond helped me when I was at rock bottom, and when I got back on my feet, he asked if I wanted to help others. Best decision I ever made. This work isn't easy, but it's the most meaningful thing I've ever done. You'll find that helping other veterans helps heal something in yourself too." As the sun began to set above ground, Marcus realized he hadn't eaten anything all day and had barely slept in over 24 hours. His body was running on adrenaline and purpose, sustained by the same intensity that had carried him through military operations. But Diesel was showing signs of fatigue, and Marcus knew he needed to take care of basic needs if he was going to be effective in the long term. He made his way back up to the barn, Diesel following with a tired but satisfied demeanor. The dog had been remarkably patient during the long hours underground, seeming to understand that important work was being done. Now, as they emerged into the fading daylight, Diesel immediately began exploring the barnyard again, investigating scents and marking territory with the confidence of a dog who had decided this was home. Marcus looked around the property with new eyes, seeing potential where he had previously seen only decay. The farmhouse could be renovated, turned into a comfortable living space and perhaps offices for network operations. The barn was already serving its purpose as a secure location for the command center. The land itself offered privacy and security, essential requirements for the kind of sensitive work the network performed. His phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting his planning. The message was from his landlord in Tulsa, reminding him that rent was due in 3 days, and asking when Marcus planned to return to collect his belongings. The mundane concerns of his old life seemed trivial now, but they still required attention. Marcus realized he had another choice to make, this one more practical but no less significant. He could maintain his apartment in Tulsa and treat the farm as a temporary project, keeping one foot in his old life while testing the waters of his new responsibilities. Or he could commit fully, burning his bridges and dedicating himself completely to continuing Raymond's work. The thought of returning to Tulsa, to his sparse apartment and aimless days, filled Marcus with a dread that was almost physical. The farm offered something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Diesel's behavior confirmed his instincts. The dog was more relaxed and confident here than Marcus had seen him since they'd first been paired together. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his landlord, explaining that he wouldn't be returning to the apartment and asking about arrangements for collecting his few possessions. The conversation was brief and businesslike, but it represented a commitment that felt both terrifying and liberating. He was casting his lot with Raymond's network, accepting full responsibility for continuing the work that had been trusted to him. That evening, Marcus drove into the nearest town to buy supplies and food, leaving Diesel to guard the property. The dog had taken naturally to his new role, patrolling the barnyard and house with the systematic thoroughness he'd once applied to clearing buildings in Afghanistan. Marcus felt comfortable leaving him alone, knowing that Diesel would alert him to any problems and that the dog was happier here than he'd been anywhere else. The town was small and quiet, the kind of place where newcomers were noticed but not necessarily unwelcome. Marcus shopped carefully, buying enough food and basic supplies to last for several weeks while he figured out the logistics of his new life. He also purchased tools and materials for basic repairs, planning to start making the farmhouse habitable while he learned to operate the network. The hardware store clerk, a middle-aged man with grease-stained hands and a friendly demeanor, struck up a conversation while Marcus was loading his purchases into the truck. "You the fellow who inherited the Reed place?" the man asked, genuine curiosity rather than nosiness in his voice. "That's right," Marcus replied, uncertain about how much he should reveal about his plans. "Good man Raymond Reed," the clerk said, nodding approvingly. "Kept to himself mostly, but he helped a lot of folks over the years. Quiet about it, but word gets around in a small town. Always seemed to have a soft spot for veterans who were down on their luck. Good to see someone taking over the place. Been empty too long." Marcus felt a surge of pride hearing Raymond described that way by someone who had known him. The network had been secret, but its effects had been visible to anyone who paid attention. Raymond had built something that mattered, and now it was Marcus's responsibility to keep it going. Driving back to the farm as darkness fell, Marcus felt a sense of anticipation that had been absent from his life for years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases to handle, new veterans to help. It would also bring the beginning of his education in how to operate a network that had been 50 years in the making.
Diesel greeted him enthusiastically when he returned, the dog's entire body wiggling with joy at his handler's return. Together they unloaded the supplies and carried them into the farmhouse, which was beginning to feel less like an abandoned building and more like a home. Marcus set up a sleeping bag in the living room, near the stone fireplace that dominated one wall. He would worry about furniture and proper accommodations later. For now, he was content to camp in the house while he learned his new role. Before settling in for the night, Marcus returned to the underground command center to check for new messages and update the network stations on his progress. He found several communications waiting for him, including a detailed briefing packet that one of the veteran operators had prepared to help orient new personnel. The packet contained everything from communication protocols to financial procedures, from legal guidelines to psychological support resources. Reading through the orientation materials, Marcus gained a fuller appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of what Raymond had built. The network wasn't just an informal group of veterans helping each other. It was a professional operation with established procedures, financial oversight, and security protocols. It operated with the efficiency of a military unit and the compassion of a family support network. One section of the briefing packet particularly caught his attention. It described an annual gathering of network operators, a 3-day meeting held each summer at a secure location where participants could meet face-to-face, share best practices, and coordinate major operations. The next gathering was scheduled for 6 weeks away, and as the new operator of Shepherd Base, Marcus was expected to attend and introduce himself to the broader network community. The prospect was both exciting and intimidating. Marcus had been functioning as a loner for so long that the thought of joining a community of like-minded individuals was almost overwhelming. But it also represented the kind of connection and belonging he had been missing since leaving the military. These were people who would understand his experiences and share his commitment to helping other veterans. As he prepared to shut down the command center for the night, one final message appeared on the screen. It was from Phoenix Station, the operator who had been waiting for guidance on Sarah Martinez's case. Shepherd Base wanted to update you on Martinez's situation. Your authorization allowed us to get her into transitional housing tonight. She's got a warm bed, regular meals, and our advocate will be with her when she meets with the VA Appeals Board next week. Just wanted you to know that your first decision as network operator probably saved a life today. Welcome to the team. Phoenix out. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: pride in having made a positive difference, humility at being trusted with such important decisions, and a deep sense of gratitude for being given the opportunity to transform his own struggles into strength for others. He looked down at Diesel, who was lying at his feet with the contentment of a dog who knew he was exactly where he belonged. The anxiety and restlessness that had characterized the dog's behavior for months had been replaced by calm confidence. Diesel had found his purpose too, serving as both guardian of the command center and emotional support for Marcus as he navigated his new responsibilities. Marcus reached down to scratch behind Diesel's ears, and the dog responded with a contented sigh that seemed to sum up everything that had changed in the past 24 hours. They had both found something they didn't know they were looking for, a mission that mattered, a community that understood them, and a way to transform their own pain into healing for others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference in the lives of veterans who needed help. Marcus was ready for that responsibility, supported by a network of dedicated operators and guided by the example Raymond had set over 5 decades of quiet service. The farm that had seemed like a burden when he first arrived now felt like the foundation for a new life built on purpose and service. As he climbed the stairs back to the barn floor, Marcus felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since returning from Afghanistan. He had found his place in the world, not in spite of his struggles but because of them. The network needed someone who understood what it meant to be broken and lost, someone who could relate to the veterans they served because he had walked in their boots and fought his own battles with the same demons they faced. The abandoned farm in Oklahoma had become something much more significant than an inheritance. It had become a sanctuary, a command center, and most importantly, a home where Marcus could finally put down roots and build something meaningful with his life. The ghost farm had revealed its secrets, and in doing so, it had given Marcus the chance to discover his own hidden potential for healing and service. 3 months had transformed the Oklahoma farm from a derelict monument to neglect into something that hummed with quiet purpose. Marcus stood on the newly rebuilt front porch, watching the sun rise over fields that were now neatly mowed and maintained. The farmhouse behind him bore fresh white paint, new windows, and a roof that no longer leaked when storms rolled across the prairie. Diesel lay at his feet, no longer the anxious, hyper-vigilant animal that had arrived with Marcus, but a confident guardian who knew every inch of the property and treated it as his personal domain.
The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't happened alone. Word of the network's reactivation had spread through channels that most civilians never knew existed, reaching veterans who had been helped by Raymond Reed decades earlier and were now successful enough to give back. They had arrived quietly, usually without fanfare, bringing skills and resources that Marcus hadn't known he needed. A retired electrician from Kansas had spent 2 weeks rewiring the entire farmhouse, refusing payment and saying only that Raymond had once helped his son get clean and find work. A former Navy construction specialist had rebuilt the porch and reinforced the barn's foundation, working methodically and precisely, while sharing stories of veterans he'd known who hadn't made it home. A woman who had served as an army medic had organized the medical supplies in the underground command center, updating expired medications and ensuring that the facility could handle basic emergency care. Each volunteer had brought more than just their skills. They had brought validation that what Marcus was doing mattered, that Raymond's vision was worth preserving and expanding. More importantly, they had brought a sense of community that Marcus hadn't experienced since leaving the military. These were people who understood service, sacrifice, and the obligation to take care of those who had worn the uniform. The underground command center had evolved as well, becoming a sophisticated nerve center that coordinated assistance for veterans across a 12-state region. Marcus had learned to operate the radio equipment with the same proficiency he had once applied to military communications, and the computer systems had been upgraded with newer encryption software and faster internet connections that allowed for more secure and efficient coordination with network stations. The case files that had once seemed overwhelming were now organized into manageable workflows. Marcus had developed systems for triaging requests for help, prioritizing the most urgent cases while ensuring that no veteran was forgotten or left behind. The work was demanding, often requiring 12-hour days and careful attention to details that could mean the difference between life and death for the people they served. Sarah Martinez had become something of a success story that Marcus held onto during the more difficult cases. The Navy veteran had successfully appealed her disability claim with the help of network advocates, and she was now living in permanent housing while attending community college to study social work. She had expressed interest in eventually joining the network herself, wanting to help other veterans navigate the bureaucratic maze that had nearly destroyed her own life. Not every case had ended so positively. Marcus had learned that the network couldn't save everyone, that some veterans were too broken by their experiences or too entrenched in destructive patterns to accept help. Those failures weighed heavily on him, reminding him of friends he had lost in Afghanistan and soldiers he hadn't been able to bring home. But the successes outnumbered the failures, and each positive outcome reinforced his conviction that the work was worthwhile. The annual network gathering had been a revelation that had changed Marcus's understanding of what Raymond had built. Held at a secluded retreat center in the Colorado mountains, the 3-day event had brought together nearly 50 network operators from across the country. Marcus had expected a somber, serious affair focused on operational procedures and administrative details.
Instead, he had found a reunion atmosphere that reminded him of military gatherings, filled with the easy camaraderie of people who shared common experiences and mutual respect. The operators came from all walks of life and every branch of the military. There was a former Air Force pilot who now operated a charter airline and used his planes to transport veterans to medical appointments. A retired Marine Sergeant Major had converted his Montana ranch into a therapeutic riding program for veterans dealing with PTSD. A Navy corpsman ran a floating safe house on a converted cargo ship that moved along inland waterways, helping veterans who needed to disappear from dangerous situations. Each operator had a story of how Raymond had helped them during their darkest moments, and each had found ways to channel their gratitude into service for others. The diversity of their approaches was impressive, but the common thread was unmistakable. They were all veterans who had been given second chances and had chosen to dedicate part of their lives to providing similar opportunities for others. Marcus had presented Raymond's final operations report and his own plans for expanding Shepherd Base's capabilities. The reception had been warm and supportive, with veteran operators offering advice, resources, and encouragement for the challenges ahead. He had left the gathering feeling connected to something larger than himself, part of a community that extended far beyond the Oklahoma farm. The most significant development had come 2 weeks after the gathering, when Marcus received an encrypted message from someone identifying themselves as Command Authority. The message had been brief, but had changed everything Marcus thought he knew about the network's scope and significance. Shepherd Base, this is Command Authority. Time for full briefing on network origins and current operations. Coordinates attached. Come alone except for your dog. Bring Raymond's personal files. This meeting has been 50 years in the making. The coordinates had led Marcus to a small airstrip outside Oklahoma City, where a nondescript business jet had been waiting. The pilot had checked Marcus's identification against a list, nodded approval, and gestured for him and Diesel to board. No destinations had been announced, no explanations offered. Marcus had felt his old military instincts awakening, the ability to follow orders and trust in chain of command even when the bigger picture remained unclear. The flight had lasted 3 hours, crossing several states before landing at another small airstrip that Marcus couldn't identify. A black SUV with government plates had been waiting on the tarmac, driven by a woman in civilian clothes who had the bearing and alertness of active military personnel. She had greeted Marcus politely but formally, treating him like a dignitary rather than a confused farm owner trying to understand what he had gotten himself into. The drive had taken them through increasingly rural terrain, eventually arriving at a facility that looked like a corporate retreat center, but felt like something far more significant. The security was subtle but extensive, with cameras hidden in trees and personnel positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. Marcus had recognized the signs of a high-security government installation, the kind of place where sensitive briefings were conducted and classified operations were planned. Inside the main building, Marcus had been escorted to a conference room where 2 people were waiting for him. One was a woman in her 60s, wearing a Navy uniform with captain's insignia and ribbons that indicated extensive combat experience. The other was a man about the same age, dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent decades in military service. The woman had introduced herself as Captain Patricia Hayes, currently assigned to a Pentagon office that Marcus had never heard of, but which apparently had oversight responsibility for veteran affairs programs that operated outside normal bureaucratic channels. The man was Colonel Robert Chen, retired Army, who now worked as a civilian contractor for agencies that preferred not to be identified publicly. "Reed, or should I say Shepherd Base," Captain Hayes had begun. "You've been operating for 3 months under the assumption that you inherited a private veteran assistance network from your great-uncle. That's partially true, but it's not the complete picture. The network that Raymond built, and which you're now continuing, has been operating with government knowledge and support for over 4 decades. The revelation had been stunning, reframing everything Marcus thought he understood about Raymond's work and his own role in continuing it. The network wasn't just a private charity operation, it was part of a classified program that had been developed in response to the government's recognition that traditional veteran services were inadequate for addressing the needs of combat veterans returning from complex conflicts. Colonel Chen had taken over the briefing, explaining how the program had evolved from a small pilot project during the Vietnam era into a sophisticated support system that now operated in parallel with official VA programs. The network served veterans who couldn't or wouldn't access traditional services, providing assistance that was too politically sensitive or operationally complex for government agencies to handle directly. "Your Uncle Raymond was one of our most effective operators," Chen had explained. "He had a gift for identifying veterans who were falling through the cracks and connecting them with exactly the help they needed. More importantly, he understood that healing happens best in communities of people who share common experiences. The network he built reflects that understanding." The briefing had continued for hours, covering operational procedures, legal protections and funding mechanisms that Marcus had never suspected existed. The network wasn't just supported by donations from grateful veterans, it received discreet government funding channeled through agencies and programs that existed in the shadows of the official bureaucracy, operated by people who understood that sometimes the most important work happened outside official channels. Marcus had learned that his own military service had been monitored by network recruiters, that his struggles with PTSD and civilian life had been documented and assessed by people who understood exactly what he was experiencing. Raymond's decision to leave him the farm hadn't been sentimental. It had been the result of careful evaluation and the conclusion that Marcus possessed the skills, temperament and motivation needed to continue the network's mission. "The question now," Captain Hayes had concluded, "is whether you're willing to accept the full scope of what we're asking you to do. Operating Shepherd Base isn't just about helping individual veterans, it's about maintaining a critical component of our national security infrastructure, ensuring that the people who serve our country in combat have a place to turn when they can't find help anywhere else." Marcus had accepted without hesitation, understanding that this was what he had been searching for since returning from Afghanistan. Not just a job or a mission, but a calling that connected his own experiences to something larger and more meaningful than personal survival. The network gave him a way to transform his pain into purpose, his struggles into strength for others who faced similar challenges. The official recognition had brought new resources and responsibilities. Shepherd Base had been designated as a regional coordination center, responsible for overseeing network operations across the central United States. Marcus had been given access to government databases that helped identify veterans in need, and he had been assigned liaisons within various agencies who could provide assistance that private organizations couldn't access. The work had expanded accordingly, but so had the support systems. Marcus now supervised 3 full-time employees, all veterans who had been helped by the network and had chosen to dedicate their careers to continuing its mission. The farmhouse had been converted into a professional operations center, with secure communications equipment, computer systems, and meeting spaces that could accommodate visiting network operators and the veterans they served. Diesel had adapted to the changes with the flexibility that had made him such an effective service dog. He had learned to distinguish between visitors who belonged on the property and those who required closer scrutiny. He provided emotional support not just to Marcus but to veterans who visited the farm, seeming to sense when someone was struggling and offering his calm presence as a form of therapy. The dog's ability to detect problems had proven valuable in unexpected ways. On several occasions, Diesel had alerted Marcus to veterans who were contemplating suicide, giving him the opportunity to intervene before tragedy occurred. The dog's training in detection work had been adapted for recognizing the chemical signatures that accompanied severe depression and emotional distress, making him an early warning system for mental health crises. Marcus had also discovered talents within himself that he hadn't known existed. His military experience with communications and coordination had prepared him well for managing complex operations across multiple states. His own struggles with PTSD had given him credibility and empathy when dealing with veterans who were experiencing similar challenges.
Most importantly, his natural leadership abilities had been refined by the responsibility of making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. The farm itself had become a destination for veterans who needed more than temporary assistance. Marcus had developed a residential program that allowed veterans to stay on the property for up to 6 months while they worked through whatever challenges had brought them to the network's attention. The program combined practical support, like job training and financial counseling, with therapeutic activities like farming, animal care, and peer support groups. The residential program had been inspired by Marcus's own experience of finding peace and purpose through working on the land and caring for Diesel. There was something healing about physical labor that produced tangible results, about nurturing growing things and seeing the effects of patience and dedication. Veterans who arrived at the farm broken and hopeless often left with skills, confidence, and connections that helped them rebuild their lives. One morning in late autumn, Marcus was reviewing case files in the underground command center when Diesel's behavior indicated someone was approaching the property. The dog's alert was calm but focused, suggesting a visitor rather than a threat. Marcus made his way upstairs to find a battered pickup truck parked beside the farmhouse, its engine cooling in the crisp morning air. A young man sat behind the wheel, clearly working up the courage to get out. Marcus recognized the signs immediately, the hesitation and uncertainty of someone who had reached the end of their options and wasn't sure if they were making a mistake by asking for help. The man was probably in his early 20s, wearing a military-style jacket that looked like it had seen better days. His posture and the way he held himself suggested recent discharge, someone who was still adjusting to civilian life. Marcus walked to the edge of the porch and waited, not wanting to pressure the visitor, but making himself visible in case encouragement was needed. Diesel took position beside him, calm and non-threatening, but clearly alert to the situation. The dog had learned to read the body language of distressed veterans, and his own relaxed posture often helped put nervous visitors at ease. After several minutes, the truck door opened, and the young man got out. He was thin in the way that suggested he hadn't been eating regularly, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. His movements were careful and controlled, the way someone moves when they're expecting trouble and want to be ready for it. "Are you the person I'm supposed to talk to?" the young man called out, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure he was in the right place. "That depends on what you need to talk about," Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm and encouraging. "Why don't you come up here, and we'll figure it out together?" The young man approached slowly, his eyes taking in the renovated farmhouse, the well-maintained grounds, and Diesel's calm presence. "I heard there was someone here who helps veterans. I'm not sure if I qualify, but I don't know where else to go." Marcus gestured to one of the chairs on the porch, and the young man sat down heavily, as if the weight of whatever he was carrying had suddenly become too much to bear. "What's your name, and what kind of help do you need?" "I'm David Torres," the young man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did 2 tours in Iraq with the Marines, got out 6 months ago, and everything's been going wrong since then. Lost my job, lost my apartment, my family thinks I'm crazy because I can't sleep and I jump every time a car backfires. I've been living in my truck for 3 weeks, and I heard from someone at the VA that there might be people out here who understand what I'm going through." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with recognizing his own story in someone else's experience. David Torres could have been him 18 months ago, desperate and alone, trying to navigate a civilian world that seemed foreign and unwelcoming. The main difference was that David had found his way to the network before hitting absolute bottom. "You definitely qualify," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been where David was and had found a way through. "The first thing we're going to do is get you fed and give you a place to clean up. Then we'll sit down and figure out what kind of help you need and how we can provide it. You're not alone anymore, David. That's the most important thing to understand right now.
Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with David Torres to address the immediate crises that had brought him to the farm and to develop a longer-term plan for rebuilding his life. The process involved connecting David with network resources, including temporary housing, job training programs, and medical care for the PTSD symptoms that were making it difficult for him to function in civilian settings. But the most important element of David's recovery was simply being around other veterans who understood what he had experienced. The farm had become home to several veterans who were working through their own transitions, and the informal community that had developed provided the kind of support that couldn't be found in official programs or therapy sessions. David proved to be mechanically gifted, and he took over maintenance responsibilities for the farm's equipment and vehicles. The work gave him structure and purpose while providing practical skills that would be valuable in civilian employment. More importantly, it gave him a sense of contributing to something meaningful, of being needed and valued, rather than just helped. Marcus watched David's transformation with the satisfaction of someone who understood that healing happened in community, that veterans recovered best when they were surrounded by people who shared their experiences and understood their struggles. The young Marine was still dealing with PTSD symptoms and adjustment issues, but he was no longer facing them alone or without resources. As winter settled over the Oklahoma prairie, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that first day when he had driven up to the abandoned farm with Diesel. The property that had seemed like a burden had become the foundation for work that gave his life meaning and purpose. The isolation that had once felt like punishment had been transformed into the solitude necessary for sensitive operations and healing. Most importantly, Marcus had discovered that his own struggles with PTSD and civilian adjustment weren't disabilities to be overcome, but experiences that qualified him to help other veterans face similar challenges. The network had given him a way to transform his pain into purpose, to use his darkest moments as sources of empathy and understanding for others who were walking the same difficult path. Diesel had undergone his own transformation, evolving from a service dog focused solely on Marcus's needs to a therapy animal who provided comfort and support to every veteran who visited the farm. The dog seemed to understand that his mission had expanded, that he was now responsible for helping multiple people rather than just one. His calm presence and intuitive responses to emotional distress had become an integral part of the farm's therapeutic environment. The network itself continued to grow and evolve, with new operators joining regularly and existing stations expanding their capabilities. The government support that Marcus had learned about provided stability and resources that allowed for long-term planning and more ambitious programs. The work was demanding and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways that Marcus had never experienced in civilian employment. On a cold December morning, Marcus received a message that brought his story full circle in a way he hadn't expected. The encrypted communication came from Sarah Martinez, the Navy veteran, whose case had been the first Marcus had handled as the new operator of Shepherd Base. Shepherd Base, this is Sarah Martinez, writing to update you on my progress and to make a formal request. I completed my social work degree last month and have been accepted into a graduate program that will prepare me to provide counseling services to veterans. I would like to request assignment to your station as a full-time network operator. I believe my experience as someone who was helped by the network, combined with my new professional training, would be valuable in your operations. I'm ready to dedicate my life to helping other veterans the way you helped me. Marcus smiled as he read the message, understanding that Sarah's request represented exactly what Raymond Reed had envisioned when he first created the network. Veterans helping other veterans, people who had been broken finding ways to help repair others who faced similar struggles. The cycle of healing and service that sustained the network and gave meaning to everyone who participated in it. He approved Sarah's request immediately, knowing that her addition to the Shepherd Base team would strengthen their ability to help veterans throughout the region. Her personal experience with the bureaucratic challenges that many veterans faced, combined with professional training in counseling and social work, would make her particularly effective in helping others navigate the complex systems designed to serve them. As he prepared his response to Sarah's message, Marcus looked around the underground command center that had become his office and mission control for operations that stretched across multiple states. The space was no longer the mysterious discovery it had been when Diesel first led him to the hidden hatch in the barn floor. It was now familiar territory, a professional workspace where important decisions were made and lives were changed for the better. The transformation had been complete for both Marcus and the property he had inherited. The abandoned farm had become a thriving operations center for veteran assistance, and the broken soldier who had first arrived there had become a leader responsible for coordinating help for hundreds of people. The ghost farm had revealed its secrets, and in doing so had provided Marcus with the opportunity to discover his own capacity for healing and service. Diesel stretched beside his desk, then stood and walked to the base of the stairs that led back to the barn floor. The dog looked back at Marcus with the patient expression that meant it was time for their evening patrol of the property, a routine they had established that combined security checks with quality time together. Marcus saved his work and followed Diesel upstairs, emerging into the barn as the sun was setting over the Oklahoma prairie. The property stretched around them in the gathering darkness, no longer the desolate wasteland it had been, but a place that hummed with quiet purpose and offered hope to people who had lost their way. They walked together across the farmyard, past the renovated house where veterans were building new lives, past the workshop where practical skills were taught and confidence rebuilt, past the fields where therapeutic agriculture programs helped people reconnect with the earth and with themselves. This was what Uncle Raymond had envisioned when he first created the network, a place where service continued beyond the end of military careers, where the obligation to take care of each other remained unbroken. As they completed their circuit of the property, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for the inheritance he had initially seen as a burden. The ghost farm had indeed harbored a 50-year-old family secret, but it had been a secret worth keeping and worth continuing. Raymond Reed had built something extraordinary in the quiet hills of Oklahoma, and Marcus had been entrusted with ensuring that the work continued into the future. The network that had saved Marcus's life now provided him with the opportunity to save others, creating a cycle of healing and service that honored the best traditions of military brotherhood, while addressing the complex challenges facing veterans in civilian society. The abandoned farm had become a sanctuary where broken people could find the pieces of themselves they thought were lost forever, and where those pieces could be reassembled into something stronger and more purposeful than what had existed before. Standing on the porch as darkness settled over the prairie, Marcus understood that he had found what every veteran searched for after leaving the military, a mission worthy of the sacrifices that service required and the skills that service had developed. The ghost farm had revealed its secrets, and in doing so, it had provided Marcus with the greatest gift imaginable, the opportunity to transform his own pain into healing for others, and his own struggles into strength for people who needed someone to show them the way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.